We are very pleased to have Mr. Bill or William Braithwaite as our living history person for the day. And we'd like to ask, Mr. Braithwaite, where did you live as a child?
A little place called Putnam, Connecticut, which is the northeast corner of Connecticut. Closest town was Providence, Rhode Island, 20 miles away.
Was it a small town or a farming town? Or?
Well, by today's standards, it was a small town. It was not a farming town. It was a mill town, woolen mills, and but it was not in any way a farming town.
Now, what was your parents' occupation?
My parents, having said what I just did, my parents lived on a farm and raised chickens, raised thousands of chickens.
Okay.
And there's a little interesting story about that. They had lived in Detroit, Michigan until the Depression. They moved out east with a relative for a very short time, and they had throughout all the woes of the Depression, they had saved $1,000. And in 1932, they bought a 28-acre farm and two buildings, two farm buildings, a nice old farmhouse, all for $1,000 cash.
Times were very hard those years, very, very hard. They were very wealthy to have that amount of money saved up. Very fortunate.
Well, they squirreled that away.
Very frugal. What person or idea inspired you to succeed in life as a child?
I think it wouldn't necessarily be a person. I had been active and right through college in 4-H club. In those days, 4-H was much more prominent, and it related to farms and animals and that type of thing. And so I had joined the 4-H club as a child, probably at the age of 7 or 8, I don't know. And I've been active in 4-H until I graduated from school.
What was your project at that time when you were in youth?
It was usually was goats, and I always had half a dozen or 15 or so goats.
Well, that's interesting. What led you to choose the legal profession? Coming from the town in Connecticut, being exposed to an agrarian society at that time, and you chose the legal. What inspired you to select that profession?
It was my parents' lawyer. I met him, and he explained what he did and how he did it, and that was appealing to me. It was more appealing than, for example, being a doctor. I don't have the mind for a doctor. A doctor is a very specialized and highly credible profession, but I knew that I didn't want to become a doctor. From the time that I could remember, unlike most people in the community, I had been impressed by my parents that I was going to be going to college. And in the high school that I graduated from, probably 75 or 80 students, there were only 4 or 5 of us that went to college. Most of the people graduated from high school and went to work in the mill. Okay.
And did you serve in World War II?
I served. I was in World War II in a sense. I was not in while the fighting was going on, but I joined shortly thereafter when I was 17, and I served for about 2.5 years, and by then I had gotten a commission and went back thinking I was all through, and I had to have a reserve relationship because I did have a commission, and I joined the National Guard. And lo and behold, in 50, the Connecticut National Guard was federalized during the Korean War. So I didn't get involved in any dramatic, in the Korean War. I went to Germany. And of course the Korean War was going on in the Far East. The first time I went in, I was in the Philippines for a little over a year.
What service were you in? The Navy, Marine Corps, Army?
Army.
Army? Okay. And how did you come to live in the Barrington area, especially since you and your wife both are, fellow residents of, or were fellow residents of Connecticut?
Well, that's an interesting, to me anyway, an interesting story in itself. We were then living in Evanston. I had gone to Columbia Law School, came out for a 1-year teaching assignment in the Northwestern Law School, and about February of that year, Dillis and I decided that we would stay out in this area. We'd never heard of Barrington at that point. And one day, we saw an ad in the paper to buy some homes for $14,000 in Rolling Meadows. So I went out on a Saturday and saw Rolling Meadows and realized that was not what somebody who was accustomed to rolling hills was looking for. So I just drove up the highway, came through Arlington Heights, and as I got up to Inverness, the country changed, of course. It was rolling country. And I went to a Baird and Warner office on the corner of Northwest Highway and Hillside in Barrington. I say Barrington, I'd never heard of Barrington. And so I stopped there and I asked them what they had in homes in my price bracket, which was around 14,000 to 17,000. And they showed me 3 homes. One of them I liked very, very much. And so I went back. We checked with a relative of Dillis's who knew about the community, and he said, no, that's a good place to live. So the next day, I came out with Dillis. I didn't tell her what homes I'd looked at or which one I liked. But so she looked at the same 3 homes, and she liked the same one that I did.
Great.
So we signed a contract to buy it that day.
What year was that? What year was that, like 1952, 53?
That would be 1955.
55, yeah. So you came to live here just by chance, and it's fantastic. What can you tell us a little bit about your neighborhood or your neighbors?
Well, really, two groups to talk about. For most of our time in Barrington, until 3 years ago, we lived on Huff Street, Route 59. And there we had very nice neighbors, one on the one side, the south side, who was an architect, landscape type of person, and on the other side, originally, was an older man who we loved dearly, and then when he died, he sold to some people who bought it, and they were great neighbors too.
Oh, that's great. Now, did you work in the Barrington area eventually? Because it's quite a trip, even in 1955, to live in Barrington and work in Evanston.
Well, for the rest of that year, I commuted to Evanston, or actually Chicago. Law school was downtown. And I took the train in just like everybody else. But then after that was over, Then my first job out of teaching at the law school was at a law firm called Winston Strawn, which is now some giant firm, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I took the train in like everybody else. In the early days, that's a memory that very few people would have today. The first 6 months or year, we had these old coal-burning trains, and they belched forth the smoke and cinders. And the train cars
Yes.
did not have tight-fitting windows. The windows would usually have this much open, so it was always cold if it was the wintertime, and the soot and everything came in. So if you had an important meeting that day, you would always take in your briefcase an extra shirt so you could change.
My, that's interesting. When did they convert then? When did that Northwestern train convert to
I would say
locomotive?
it started in 1957, perhaps.
Okay. I remember in '64 they came out with a double-decker train and they removed those older cars, the heavier cars. Well, what was your first job in the Barrington area?
I'm sorry?
What was your first job here in the Barrington area? I understand from doing some research on your background, you have served as an attorney for many communities in the Barrington area.
Well, over the years, my first one was almost an accident. I received a phone call to go down to a meeting at the home in South Barrington of Bill Rose.
Oh, yes.
Rose Packing Company
Oh, yes.
and country store. He's now deceased. And I got to the meeting. The people there were trying to figure out how to form a village so that they could prevent another group from coming in to form a village to break the zoning. And so we worked all weekend, nonstop, literally nonstop. I went home Sunday night for a few minutes to change clothes, and then we drove in early in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, to the courthouse to file our petition ahead of the other group. And that's how I started working in the Barrington area. That was my first municipal experience of any kind.
Now, can you describe, your recollections of the communities to the south of you? As you mentioned, there was another group that wanted to incorporate it as a different village and perhaps even have large subdivisions with prefabricated housing. Could you share some of your ideas on why the village of South Barrington needed to retain their zoning rights?
Well, because the people involved who would have been included in the other village were the same people in the same homes in general that wanted to keep, in those days, 5-acre zoning. That since has come down to reflect the facts of life down there.
Well, what was happening to the communities south of South Barrington?
We didn't have much contact with those. Hoffman Estates was not in existence, not out there anyway at that time. And I don't remember which other communities there were. These were the people forming, one other group wanted to form their own village so they could break the zoning. Not necessarily mass housing, but 1 acre or less compared to the 5 acres of South Barrington.
So were there threats to the communities with all of these builders, corporations coming in and buying huge plots of land?
Well, they were doing it all the time. After we formed South Barrington, I think it was Pulte Homes or Centex, I guess Centex, had about 500 acres of what was then vacant land, just a little bit west of Barrington Road. that they were going to put into mass housing. But again, working quickly and over a weekend, we put together an annexation to South Barrington right through the middle of their property. And it ended with a piece on 59 that group had to buy. The lady that owned that piece on 59, Route 59,
Right.
handed it for sale. So part of our deal was that we agreed to buy her property so she could sign the petition. And that stopped that Suntex Homes deal.
Okay, from your first position as helping to incorporate the village of South Barrington, did your practice grow from, from that event, or?
Yes, it did. Shortly after that, I got a call from John Cutler at Chapman and Cutler, but was then in his very large law firm. And I had met him somewhere, and he had me as the attorney for North Barrington. But but he was doing most of the legal work. So he said, I've had enough of trying to do the legal work. You know something about it. So my first real village that I represented after forming South Barrington was North Barrington.
Were you also engaged in the village of Barrington or some of the other areas too as the attorney?
Yes, I represented Barrington for quite a number of years. Represented various other villages from time to time as they came along. And at one point we represented most of the villages in the Barrington area.
What do you feel was your most successful event or, job or task as a mayor of all of these areas?
You mean the village attorney?
Yeah, the village attorney, right. Because is it primarily just doing resolutions and in those types of papers, or was it?
No, and the key for success of any attorney in almost any representation is to understand and provide guidance other than legal to his clients. And so I think what ran through all of these were, of course, the various villages all had a common expectation of trying to defend the zoning. And so it was not a case of saying, this is what the statute says. Most of the time that involved much strategy and planning and working with the mayor.
Now, did your wife, Dilla, support you in these events, and how did you support her as the owner of Finn's Fabrics?
Well, she did not get involved directly in the legal matters. In fact, most of what I was doing was confidential, even to the point of the name of the client, sometimes confidential. As far as her support, my supporting her, she ran the fabric store, and I didn't have much to do with that. She didn't need my help.
Did she ever ask your advice? Do you think this would look good on me, or?
No, she knows better than that.
Did you ever mistake a comment and not tell her how great she looked, or?
Oh no, one of my joys is being able to see and say how wonderful she looks. As you know, because you know her.
Yes, I do. Yes.
She has a wonderful sense of taste and fashion.
You're a great husband to compliment your wife in that way. How did you meet Dillis?
Oh, that's an interesting little story. Again, involving 4-H. When I got out of the military the first time, went back to the University of Connecticut, and I joined the University 4-H Club. And over a period of time, I became president and she was secretary. And we had much business to conduct, and then just our relationship just grew from that.
Well, that's
It wasn't a suddenly turn on the light situation. I came to appreciate and love her basically from that 4-H relationship.
How many years have you been married?
Oh, we've been married since 1951, so this year was 68, I guess.
That's fantastic. Congratulations. What is your secret to a successful and happy relationship?
Oh, it has to be a basic, first, respect for each other and genuine love. I don't know there's any one key. I was asked something along those lines one time at a meeting at our church, and I startled everyone, including Dillis, by saying that an important part of a marriage is communication, and there's various methods of communication. And one of my methods is, have I told you lately that I love you, my darling? I'm telling you now.
That's beautiful. Okay, what changes to the Barrington area are you most proud of?
I think probably, yes, definitely. There was a time when Jewel was not where it was. It was in another location in Barrington. And Jewel and a developer had a plan to take the property, which is on the east side of Eastern Avenue, a large piece of property, and have a shopping center there.
Gateway to Barrington?
That wasn't, I don't think was the name of it, might have been.
Gateway to Barrington. Yeah, they wanted to have like a mini wood field.
Yeah, that was the one. And we battled that both in the courts and locally, and in the courts too, and were able to defeat them.
Now, why was there a court? Why did it end up in court?
Because the village, I think, had turned him down. Because if the developer had taken Jewel out there, any possible hope of having a centralized downtown would have disappeared. I mean, you think of the number of people that go to Jewel, they go to a lot of other places, but often Jewel is a focus place. And so that was a real battle, and went in court, and the trial judge ruled our way. And I think it went up on appeal, but in any case it was sustained. And so the village was able to keep Jewel downtown, and then leading to what we now see.
And I know that property is very close to the Lyons Elementary School and the middle school, is that correct? Where that property would have been, it was northeast of Northwest Highway, correct?
Yes, these would have been close to.
Yeah, to the elementary school. And what would you like to see changed in the Barrington area? If you had a plan where you could envision, future planning for Barrington, what would you include?
Well, I think the main thing I would like to change, but I know it will never happen in my lifetime, is the four laning Huff Street 59 in particular for traffic. We need to reduce the amount of traffic. And we make, those of us who live here often take roundabout ways just to avoid the traffic running from Northwest Highway to Hillside on 59.
And how about the train situation? Would you change anything with the Metra or with the Canadian EJ&E?
Well, Metro, no, I think that provides good service, although they have cut back recently. The old EJ&E, Northern, Canadian Northern,
Right.
that I certainly would like to see them get out of town, but that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
The village fought that, and I think it was very good that they fought it, because we are, as a result of the battle, soon going to have an underpass on Route 14. So at least critical vehicles, emergency vehicles, will be able to get from one part of town to the other,
Right.
which they cannot do now.
Yeah.
And there's been a time when, an actual dear lifetime, where the train has been stopped at the crossings, all the crossings in Barrington. And one time not too long ago, somebody carrying a heart patient in an ambulance had to make an end run to Lake Zurich and then come in by that route.
How did you help keep Barrington on the path of responsible development? I was very surprised that Barrington hadn't increased its boundaries, perhaps to certain parts of Palatine, going eastward, going northward, incorporating Lake Barrington, North Barrington, going southward, incorporating South Barrington. It's remained very much as it was back, when in the whenever it was in the 1900s, in terms of the boundary. But how were you able to keep this development responsible so you didn't have all these big housing projects?
I first of all, I didn't do that. The various village boards of Barrington over the years have done that. And they've done it mainly by controlling the zoning. And if they annexed property on the boundaries, which was then available before Palatine, it would have meant a different kind of development. It would have probably meant retail or mass housing. And the retail would again have negatively impacted the downtown Barrington.
And so were you involved in any way with Barrington Area Council of Governments?
Yes.
And what was your role?
That was started largely through several people, but the Village of Barrington mayor at that time, Fred Voss, and then of course Janet Agnoletti became the real spark plug. And she's the one who over the last many years has really run that so well and been able to step in to help the villages. Almost every significant zoning fight that we've had anywhere in the Baycog area has involved the Baycog community. And Janet Agnoletti has had a major role in that, and very skillful in dealing with those. And
what was your involvement in that, in Baycog then?
It was, it meant some of the zoning fights, and I was representing the village, but it was really representing Baycog. Usually Baycog could not be a party to the litigation, but I would be representing, say, the village of South Barrington in some litigation. But Baycog was the one who brought together the funding from the various villages to handle the cost.
Do you have any stories with relating to any developers or builders? Now, I mentioned earlier that another pillar of the community, Mr. Lagerschulte, said, "Oh yes, I remember Bill." What was your relationship to Bill? To Jack Lagerschulte in the village here.
Well, he was, he was somebody you could go to and get help on things from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was the one who, at one point, was being very helpful with the village, and I was always helpful with the village, but at one point, where the train tracks parking lot is on the east side of the train track, there was a proposal for mass housing, and the village was very anxious to prevent that and acquire the property. And I remember so clearly just seeing him somewhere on the street and saying something about, we have some property over there, this particular house that we need to acquire by the village. But if the village goes, we're going to find it difficult to get it. The price will go up and so forth. I said, would you investigate if you can tie it up? Well, about a week later, I was walking down the street and he called out and said, I bought your lot. I said, you what? He said, the property you wanted. I said, I bought it. I said, you bought it? Yeah, he did. He just plain bought it. And he held it for the village, sold it to the village for what he paid for it. So there were many, many fruitful events.
Were you involved in helping to plan that historic district in Barrington? I know we received a book of photographs and descriptions of homes in the preservation area. Were you involved with that?
No, I was not involved in that, really.
Okay.
The one who was and was very successful, to whom the community owes a great debt, is Sam Oliver. She was always one who brought these properties to the attention of people and led to the formation of the historic districts and preservation, which of course has become very controversial because sometimes it can be abused in trying to get the ultimate in detail.
And also it may temper the notion of having tear-downs. Some communities do have a lot of these, some of the older homes are being torn down and replaced by these small mansions. And it kind of, it destroys the integrity of the neighborhood when you have this newer home in all of these 1920 bungalows or Victorian homes.
Well, we have examples of that. A very recent example, it's not in the historic district, but on one of the streets a few blocks away. I'm not going to identify it. There's a range of homes of various styles, but all with a general theme of more or less the same size, same price. And someone has come along and put in this enormous mansion. It does not seem there's more than 5 or 10 feet between the building and the lot lines. And it's just so, to me, so much out of keeping that there isn't any historic district there.
Okay. Are you involved in any organization presently? For example, conservation, or I believe it's with children, with adopted children, or are you and your wife involved in those things, or in church activities?
Well, we're both very active in our church, Barrington Methodist Church, and there are a lot of people there who are doing good work for not just Barrington, but for the whole area. The church is located on 59 in Algonquin Road.
Now, that's the church that burned down originally in downtown Barrington.
That's correct.
Yes. That was like the welcome to Barrington sign when you saw the church on the right-hand side if you're proceeding north. Did you visit the older library that was located on Huff Street?
Oh, yes.
The original?
Yes, from the time we moved into Barrington, we first moved on Russell Street for 4 years, and the minister during part of that time was kitty corner across the street from us, Carl Medling. And so we knew him. He had children like about the ages of ours, and Carl was to us, was a wonderful person.
I understand at your age you also are actively working. Do you want to tell me a little bit about that? Your wife said, well, if you want to reach Bill, you're going to have to call him at work.
Well, I've been working just ever since I can remember, because I love practicing law, and just that simple. You know, I would say that you mentioned being healthy, and I attribute much of my good health and my wife's good health to her carefulness in selecting the food we eat. We're not what I call food faddists, and they're fine. I think they do well, but we eat what you and I would call, quote, normal foods, but the right amounts and the right kinds of combinations of vegetables and proteins and so forth.
Do you help her in the garden? I understand she's an avid gardener. Do you help her in the garden?
Somewhat, but not as much as she goes almost every day, every other day.
So you help her devour the end product, correct? Yeah.
But I usually it's just to go down there with her, to be with her while she does it.
We noticed that you and Dillis are very passionate about the community, what you do for the community, and keeping active. Do you like to share some of your thoughts about that?
Well, I think that's part of keeping you young. If you're active and enjoying the activities, and particularly in Barrington, where there are so many wonderful people who are doing so much. I mean, you take Bob Lee, who rides his bicycle from Canada to the borders of Mexico to raise money for 3 causes, $1 million for 3 causes, which he raised, and but one of them being ALS and others. It's just so many, just great people. Particularly when you're part of a movement of many people, wonderful people, who are preserving the community. And that's what makes Barrington unique. You come out on the train, and until you get a little bit north of Palatine, it's just an extension of the city. Then when you get on the other side, and you get up in Fox River Grove and Cary, it's another extension in a different way. And Barrington is a jewel, it's an island. And of course, part of this that I don't think we've touched on is the fact that there are so many people in Barrington, percentage-wise more than in any other community, who are civic-minded, who found organizations, who lead the pack, the ones who are spending their own time and money to help preserve the kind of community it is.